The night I caught my neighbor on the landing outside her apartment, she was 3 glasses past steady and 1 second from the stairs, and I got there fast enough that her descent stopped at my arms instead of the floor. She said thank you. I said it was no problem. I walked her inside, made her drink a glass of water, and went back to my own apartment. The next morning she knocked on my door, and when I opened it, she looked at me with the clear-eyed, early morning certainty of a woman who had made a decision sometime in the night, and she said, "I want you to know, I planned that. I did not have coffee yet. I want that on record." She said it without apology, without the decency of a joke to hide behind, and without any apparent intention of explaining what exactly she had planned, or what, if anything, she expected me to do with the information. She just looked at me in the doorway, her hair still up from the night before, one earring still in, and waited. That was the moment I understood that Vera Castillo, who had lived 6 feet from my front door for 2 years, who argued with me about the hallway light timer and borrowed my dish soap and left a single potted succulent outside my door the week I had the flu without explanation or acknowledgement, was either the strangest person I had ever lived next to, or the bravest. Possibly both. That combination, in my experience, tends to go together. My name is Daniel Osai. I'm 34. I restore antique furniture for a living. Chairs, tables, cabinets. Things people's grandmothers left behind that the grandchildren don't know what to do with. I work out of a studio I rent 2 neighborhoods over. And the work is slow and exact and requires a tolerance for things that are damaged being returned to what they were before the damage, which I find, on most days, to be a satisfying way to spend time. My apartment is small and has good light, and is on the 3rd floor of a building that is mostly quiet, except for the woman across the hall, who is not. Vera was 31. She was a high school art teacher who talked at the same volume, whether she was in a classroom or a hallway or a building lobby, which is to say all conversations with her had the quality of an event. She had paint on her hands most of the time, not artist's paint, the cheap poster paint of someone who is responsible for 30 teenagers and has stopped being precious about her clothes. And she had a laugh that started somewhere low and arrived fully, and did not apologize for the space it took up. She had moved in 2 years ago with a van full of furniture that was too big for the apartment, a box of plants that took up the entire elevator, and opinions about the hallway light timer that she expressed to me directly on day 3 of her tenancy, before we had exchanged names. We had exchanged names, eventually. We had also exchanged dish soap, a borrowed drill, the better part of a Saturday helping each other move furniture that was too big for both our apartments, and approximately 14 months of brief, warm, occasionally sparring conversations, conducted mostly through a door or across a hallway at odd hours of the day. We were neighbors in the full sense of the word, present and known to each other, sharing a small geography, interested in each other's days. What we were not, in 2 years, was more than that. The door was always between us, or about to be. That had been, I realized on the morning she said I planned this, a very deliberate arrangement on one of our parts, and I was beginning to understand it had not been mine. The night it happened was a Saturday in October. The good kind of October evening, cold enough that the hallway smelled like somebody's radiator had come on. Warm enough inside the apartments that everyone had their windows cracked. I'd been up late finishing a repair on a rocking chair that had been giving me trouble for a week, and I heard the elevator, and then I heard the particular careful footstep of someone navigating a hallway with more precision than they had available to them, and I opened my door on instinct. She was at the top of the stairs, not falling, not yet, but leaning into the newel post with the specific philosophical relationship to vertical that 3 glasses of wine produces in a person who is also carrying heels by the straps and a bag that kept shifting on her shoulder. She saw me in the doorway, and her expression did the thing it always did when she caught me watching her. A flash of something quick and half-hidden before the ordinary face came back. I crossed the hall. She said she was fine. I said I could see that. I got a hand under her elbow, not grabbing, just there, and walked her the 6 feet to her own door and waited while she found her keys, which took a moment and then another moment. And she said she'd been at Renata's birthday, and I said I gathered, and she smiled at the door while she unlocked it, a smile I wasn't supposed to see, aimed at the keyhole and not at me. Inside, I filled a glass of water and set it on the counter and told her to drink it, and went back across the hall and thought very little of it, which is the honest account and also the one I'd be revising significantly by morning. She knocked at 8:45. I opened the door and she was standing there in a different shirt. Same earring situation. One in, one apparently still somewhere in her apartment. And she had the look she got when she was about to say something she'd already committed to before she started. I knew that look. I'd cataloged it over 2 years of hallway conversations without examining the catalog. She said, "I want you to know I planned that." I said the falling. Not the falling, the needing help. The being in a state where I'd need you to. She said it flatly. Informational. I've had 3 weeks of trying to find a reason to knock on your door that wasn't the dish soap. And last night I had 2.5 glasses of wine at Renata's, and I thought, if I just lean into the stairs slightly. Slightly, I said. I wasn't going to fall. I just thought, if you happen to come out of your apartment, you might. She stopped. She looked at me steadily. I'm telling you this because I'd rather tell you than have you find out some other way, which is what would happen because I tell Renata everything and Renata tells everyone, and by Tuesday this would be a story at school. I looked at her for a moment. I was holding my coffee cup. I didn't drink from it. How long, I said. How long what? Have you been trying to find a reason to knock? She tilted her head the way she did when she was deciding how much to give. About a year, she said, since the furniture day. I thought about the furniture day. A Saturday in October, the year before, she'd gotten a dresser up 3 flights and gotten it stuck in her hallway because the hallway turned and the dresser didn't. And I'd come out to investigate the sound, and we'd spent 2 hours taking it apart in the hallway and rebuilding it inside. At one point, we'd been on the floor with the hardware between us, and she'd handed me a screwdriver, and our hands had overlapped for a second, and I'd thought something and filed it under proximity and neighbors and left it there. The screwdriver, I said. She blinked. What? You handed me the screwdriver, and we both held it at the same time for a second. I thought something then. I told myself it was nothing. A very particular silence arrived in the hallway. She looked at me with an expression that was organizing itself from surprised into something that had more weight to it. The expression of a woman adding up a column of numbers and arriving at a total she'd guessed at for a long time and is now holding in both hands. You thought something? She said. Carefully, I told myself it was nothing. I said. That was a separate decision. She absorbed that. Her hand went to the earring she still had in, touched it, the way she touched things when she was thinking, and she said, "A year of dish soap." I noticed the dish soap was never quite empty when you brought it back. I was topping it up so I'd have a reason to return it and not look like I was returning it too fast. I know, I said. You know. I have a workshop, I said. I notice when things are the same level they were before. She stared at me. Not the deciding look, not the committed to this look, a new one. Unguarded in a way I hadn't seen her face be in 2 years of hallway conversations, the full version of the expression that usually flashed and went before I could read it. You've known for a year, she said, that I was topping up the dish soap. I've suspected, I said. Since around February. That's 8 months ago. Yes, and you didn't say anything. Neither did you. She made a sound, half a breath, half something that might become a laugh if it decided to, and looked at the floor, and then back at me. So what you're saying, she said, is that we have been conducting an elaborate hallway performance of not knowing for the better part of a year. The dish soap. The succulent. She pointed at me. The succulent was genuine. You had the flu. I know. That's why I kept it. The look again, the full, unguarded one. And this time it stayed. She leaned against the door frame, arms loose at her sides, the deciding energy finally gone from her, and she looked at me the way you look at something you've been trying to see clearly for a long time, and are only now letting come into focus. So the question, she said, is what we do now that we've both admitted we've been performing not knowing. I have a thought about that, I said. Of course you do. But she smiled when she said it. The real one. The full one. The one that took up space without apologizing. Go on. I think, I said, you should come in. I'll make you coffee. You can tell me what the furniture day looked like from your side. And then we see what the morning looks like. She considered that. 1 second. 2. Her hand was still at the earring. Then she dropped it, and she crossed the threshold of my apartment, 6 feet across the hall, the distance she'd been maintaining for 2 years. And she sat down at my kitchen table with the comfort of someone who had been in the room before in her imagination and is checking it against the real version. She looked around at the workshop tools on the shelf, the half-restored cabinet leaning against the wall, the wood samples laid out on the counter that I'd been matching for a week. You have a lot of broken things in here, she said. I'm working on them, I said. Do they get fixed? Always, I said. Just slowly. I poured her coffee and set it in front of her and stood on the other side of the table, and I let myself do something I hadn't let myself do in 2 years, which was think about her without immediately finding a reason to stop. The furniture day. The screwdriver. The February morning I'd measured the dish soap level with my eye and understood what the topping up meant and closed the cabinet door and gone to work without doing anything about it. The succulent, which I'd put in the window where I could see it from my chair, which I'd watered every 3rd day for 6 months, which I had told myself was because it was a living thing and deserved not to die, and not because it was hers and it was in my apartment, and those two facts together were the closest thing to what I actually wanted that I was allowing myself to have. I had been. It was becoming clear. The slower version of her plan. She looked at me over the kitchen table, with the morning light coming in behind her, one earring in, paint on the back of her left hand from something she'd been doing the day before, and she said, "Okay, tell me what the screwdriver looked like from your side." So I told her. And she told me the furniture day from hers, how she'd engineered the stuck dresser on purpose, had measured the hallway beforehand and known the dresser wouldn't fit, and brought it up anyway, on the theory that a man who restores furniture would be unable to walk past a furniture problem without intervening. I told her that was either the most elaborate or the most obvious thing I'd ever heard. She said she preferred the word architectural. I said that was hiding with better vocabulary. She stole a piece of toast off my plate, unannounced. And I let her. And the letting was the first honest thing either of us had done in 2 years without the hallway between us. The morning was long and good, and went in the direction mornings go when two people have been circling each other for a year and have finally sat down. After that, the hallway was different. Not because anything in it changed. The light timer still argued with both of us. The elevator still took too long, but because we were different in it. She still knocked for dish soap occasionally, But she didn't top it up anymore, and I didn't pretend not to notice. And one Tuesday she knocked, and when I opened the door, she was just standing there with nothing in her hands, and she said, "I don't actually need anything. I just wanted to see if you were home." And I said I was. And she came in. And that was the new architecture of it. A few months later, the rocking chair I'd been working on the night she almost fell came back in from the studio. Finished. I'd restored the joints, stripped and refinished the wood. Replaced 2 spindles that were past saving with matched ones turned from the same oak. It had taken longer than it should have because I kept setting it aside, and I realized somewhere in the middle of the second month that I kept setting it aside because finishing it meant returning it to the client, and I wasn't ready for the thing that had been in the room on the night we started to be gone from the room. I kept that analysis to myself. Some things are only interesting once you're on the other side of them. Vera saw the finished chair the afternoon I brought it in. She was on the couch reading, which was a thing she did in my apartment now, on the theory, stated, defended, undefeated, that my couch got better afternoon light than hers. She looked up when I came in, and she looked at the chair, and she said, "That's the one from that night." "Yes," I said. She looked at it for a moment. "You took a long time with it. It needed it." She put her book down and came over and ran her hand along the finished arm of the chair, the way she handled things she was really looking at. Her thumb followed the grain slowly, the way mine did when I was checking a repair, the same instinct, just learned from a different kind of work. And I stood there and let her look, because I'd learned by then that Vera looking at something carefully was the most serious version of her there was, the version underneath the classroom volume and the arriving laugh. She was quiet for almost a full minute. "It's beautiful," she said. Then, quieter, "I was afraid you'd come out of your apartment that night, and I'd have overplayed my hand, and it would have been weird forever. That's the part I didn't plan for." I thought about the 10 seconds between hearing the elevator and opening my door, the instinct I'd moved on without examining, and how the whole architecture of the last year, the dish soap, the screwdriver, the succulent, the furniture day, had been 2 people building toward the same door from opposite sides. "I came out," I said, "because I heard the elevator and I already knew your step." She went still. Not the dramatic kind, just the kind where a body absorbs something and needs a moment to do it. "You knew my step," she said. "3rd floor. You're the only one who takes the elevator instead of the stairs. You get out on the left and your bag shifts every time because you carry it on your right shoulder." She looked at me for a long time. Then she sat down in the rocking chair, slow, and settled into it, and rocked it once to feel the balance, and looked up at me from it with the full, unguarded expression. The one I'd catalogued without examining, the one I'd been waiting 2 years to get in good light without a door between us. "I planned the falling," she said. "You already knew the landing." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She knew what I meant by not answering, because that's what 2 years across a hallway gets you, the full vocabulary of each other's silences. She rocked the chair once more, and the joints held, and she smiled at the ceiling with the smile that took up space. And I went to make coffee for both of us without being asked. Months later, the chair went back to the client, and Vera mourned it with a sincerity that embarrassed us both. And I told her I'd find her one, and she told me she didn't need a chair, she needed the one that was there that night. And I said that was the most impractical thing I'd ever heard, and she said I could put that on my list of things I loved about her, which was the first time either of us had used that word at all about anything, and she set it to the window so I could choose not to have heard it if I needed to. I didn't need to. I wrote it down in my head in the margin of everything else, in permanent ink, right next to the step I'd already known, and the dish soap that was never quite empty, and the succulent left outside my door without explanation. It wasn't new. It had probably always been her. Years later, when people asked how we got together, she told it as the story of a man who already knew her step and chose to keep that information to himself for 8 months, like a person with deeply questionable decision-making. I told it as the story of a woman who measured a hallway before she moved a dresser into it and called that spontaneous. We were both right. The truth is that neither of us knocked when we should have, and both of us built the longest possible route to a door that was 6 feet away. And one Saturday night in October, she leaned into a staircase she'd already done the math on, and I came out of my apartment on an instinct I'd already catalogued. And that was the whole distance. Finally. Closed. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. What would you have done if the person across the hall admitted, the morning after, that they'd engineered the whole thing, and you realized you'd been doing the same, just slower? And have you ever known, quietly, for longer than you'd admitted, that someone was finding reasons to be near you and chosen not to say so, because saying so would mean deciding? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.